So I've been tested more than twice all these other athletes, yet I struggle to get a date. So, I've talked to Sheikh Turkey and said, Sheikh Turkey, can you assist me here? As far as Chandler rematching Oliveira, I'm happy with the date. It's November. Maybe we can still do it after, if they're not going to line me out till maybe December, January, February, or one of these dates. Maybe we can still do it. I'm just a bit, out of the loop with it, so.
Alright, so now that Conor McGregor vs. Michael Chandler is officially out of the UFC's plans, I've been getting the feeling that good old Mystic Mac has been getting iced by Dana and the UFC for their own ulterior motives. And in this video, I'll talk about why I think this is the case and what I think Dana's plans are for McGregor's next fight. But first, let's go over the sequence of events starting from UFC 303 because I feel like the context matters here. Obviously, Conor pulls out of the main event with Michael Chandler due to a broken toe, thus the fight gets postponed to a later date. And after a couple of weeks of radio silence where he and Dana were presumably negotiating the deals of his next return date, Dana announces that McGregor is going to return in early 2025. And literally minutes after this, Conor takes to Twitter and urges to Dana to book him for a fight in December of this year. Honestly, December of this year versus early 2025 is barely even a difference to me, so I don't get what all the ruckus is about, but if the Mac wants to come back sooner, then cool, why not? And after some more weeks of both parties making conflicting public messages, this past week Dana makes the bombshell announcement that McGregor vs. Chandler has officially been scrapped because Mike is sick and tired of waiting. In response to this, Conor makes a tweet where he calls Mike a pussy, then in response to this, Mike posted a video where he immediately says he's not going to respond to Conor's tweet by responding to Conor's tweet.
Alright, there you have it, boys and girls. I'm not even going to respond to Conor's stupid little tweet acting like I dipped. The simple fact of the matter is, you are the most unreliable human being that has ever graced mixed martial arts. If Conor can finally get his house in order, if he can finally string together a couple of sober days, string together a couple of days where he's actually training and actually feeling good, and he can actually finally make good on his promise of the greatest comeback in combat sports history, if he can finally pony up, then I will fight Conor after I dispatch of Charles Oliveira.
And look, even though I don't really agree with Mike when he says that McGregor is the most unreliable fighter in UFC history, I do agree with him when he says that at least for modern day Conor, the fight date that's given is no longer a set in stone thing. Because historically speaking, when Conor said that he's going to fight on a certain date, there wouldn't be anything that could stop him from stepping into the octagon. But nowadays, with this version of Conor that's been endlessly partying and can't seem to stay sober for any given period of time, we kinda have to take his claims that he's returning on this date or that date with a grain of salt. But in Conor's defense here, although it's really frustrating as a fan to see all of his return announcements end up not coming to fruition, I think that in this case right now, where he's calling for a December return, it seems like, to me at least, that Dana and Hunter Campbell are purposefully keeping him on the sidelines. Now, of course, Conor has probably had several legitimate opportunities to return to the cage in the last couple of years that fell through either by his own choice or his own poor decision making, I don't doubt that. But I think where we find ourselves at this current moment, I really do get the feeling that he at least thinks he wants to fight and wants to step back into the cage. I mean, this wouldn't be the first time where he's expressed frustration with the UFC for not giving him fights when he's supposedly ready. In 2023, he made some public complaints about not being able to get a clear timeline from the UFC. He also complained in March of this year that he was irritated with Dana for his return constantly getting pushed back, and just last week he had this to say about getting a set in stone date of return. So at least where we stand right now, according to Conor, the guy wants to get back into the cage as soon as possible, but he's being kept out of the loop from Dana and Hunter's plans. And sure, this could just be him lying, but again, I'm just not sure that that's the case here. Like, McGregor is literally asking for permission from the UFC to have a boxing match with the Saudis so he can at least stay active, so I do get the feeling that this is one of these rare times with modern day Conor where he genuinely is itching to fight, but for whatever reason, Dana doesn't want to cash in on his most valuable asset. And in my opinion, the only reasonable explanation for that is because they're trying to make some big business moves in 2025 where they feel like they need to leverage him in order to make those things happen. And with all this being said, from specifically after UFC 303 to now, I think that Dana's plans are to save Conor to fight in 2025 so that they can leverage his huge box office numbers to negotiate their next big TV deal, which if you're asking me, I don't think that this is a bad move. If you're unfamiliar, the UFC's current broadcast partnership deal with ESPN expires at the end of 2025. Dana's been talking talking more and more about the UFC's next broadcast deal over the last few weeks, and he's even mentioned numerous times that there's a pretty real possibility that we might be seeing the UFC on regular TV, similar to other major sports like the NFL, NBA, and MLB. And guess fucking what? The UFC's officially allowed to sign a new broadcast deal starting in January 2025. It's an open and shut case, Watson. Look, I really think that this is why the UFC is keeping Conor on the sidelines for the rest of this year. It just makes too much sense to me. And I know a lot of you guys are probably saying, oh, Conor's never gonna come back, you're buying wolf tickets, blah blah blah, and you might be right, but that's not the point of what I'm saying here. I'm saying that in the perspective of Dana, Hunter, and the other UFC executives, they're cutting their losses on trying to get McGregor back into the cage this year, and they're looking at the bigger picture so that they can leverage his guaranteed 1 million pay-per-view buys as a negotiation tool. At the end of the day, as long as Conor is a contracted fighter with the UFC, this guy is nothing more than a chess piece in the business dealings of Dana. He's obviously the biggest and most important chess piece, of course, but what comes along with being the biggest and most important is that sometimes he needs to be used for the biggest and most important situations. And seeing as all of the UFC's broadcast deals throughout the company's history have been instrumental in attracting fans to the sport, I do see why Dana sees 2025 as a pivotal calendar year to really elevate them to the next level of legitimacy. Obviously, the UFC was able to get their foot in the door with Spike TV from 2005 to 2011, which is when I got into the sport. Then the UFC's next major broadcast deal with Fox really changed the game for the UFC while also making them $100 million a year in the process from 2011 to 2018. Then in 2019, we began the ESPN era where the entire deal is estimated to have brought in about $1.5 billion to the UFC. So the significance of these broadcast deals is pretty obvious, not just in terms of money, but also for exposing new people to the sport and hopefully bringing in new fans to watch. And let's just use the NBA's new broadcast deal that they just completed 2 months ago in July as a frame of reference. The NBA was able to finesse an 11-year, $76 billion agreement with Disney, NBC, and Amazon, and of course I don't think that the UFC is going to be able to pull off signing a deal quite at that magnitude right now. I'm sure that Dana and Hunter saw this and thought to themselves that with the right circumstances, they can make something similar happen for the UFC. Because if done properly, I could really see the UFC's next broadcast partnership at the very least exceed the $5 billion mark, and who knows, maybe even upward of $10 billion. Now let's bring this back to Conor. Seeing as the UFC will be allowed to sign on the dotted line with whoever gives them the best offers starting in January, and the ESPN deal doesn't end until the end of 2025, I feel very strongly that Dana's going to use the last 2 fights on McGregor's UFC contract to get him to fight twice in the first half of next year so that they can really prop up their revenue and pay-per-view sales stats. And of course it's frustrating as a fan that we haven't seen this guy fight in such a long time, and Conor's even expressed a ton of frustration himself for supposedly wanting to fight and not being able to get a date, but it does seem obvious to me that Dana's plans are for McGregor to inflate the UFC's numbers for new interested partners. With that being said, I don't know why Dana can't just tell the guy that this is what they have planned. I mean, it seems like it would be a pretty simple conversation for Dana to just tell Conor that they're leveraging him for their next broadcast deal or whatever, but at the same time, I guess playing those cards and letting Conor know how valuable he is to their little scheme would probably open the door for Conor to ask for more money for his final 2 fights on his current contract, so I guess it's probably Dana just playing the game. And if Dana and the UFC are able to get him in the octagon twice by like summer of 2025, their sell to whoever wants to be their next broadcast partner is probably going to look very, very strong. Especially seeing as there is a noteworthy lack of true pay-per-view stars in the company lately, so if they can hypothetically get 2 Conor cards that break 1 million buys before summer of next year, then I would imagine that would really, really help get a better price on their next TV deal. Like, the UFC no longer has Ronda Rousey or Brock Lesnar or really any other true pay-per-view star on their roster anymore, and with how important these broadcast deals have been to the UFC, Conor is by far and away the most important and impactful fighter that the UFC has as they head into 2025. But obviously, this is a massive, massive risk being taken by the UFC, because even though I do think that Dana's plans make sense from a business perspective, and if everything goes right, then I'm sure it will be well worth it, but relying on a modern-day Conor McGregor to be ready, healthy, and present on a fight date is as dubious as it's ever been. Because let's be real, everything that I just said about Dana's plans hinges on the very uncertain reality that McGregor will be willing or able to step into the cage on whatever dates he's given, which as we all know by now is a really hard thing to put your faith in these days. A lot of you guys watching firmly believe that he's never going to fight again in the UFC and that he's already retired but doesn't know it, and even though I'm trying to stay optimistic about his return, there's a really big part of me that's not confident that we'll ever see him back in the octagon. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's the most unreliable fighter in UFC history or anything, but the Conor of 2024 is way less reliable than the Conor of a decade ago. And even though I do think that the UFC is trying to use him as their trump card for their next broadcast deal, and even though I do think it's a good idea for them to do so, I also think it's a massive risk, because as much of a trump card as Conor is, he's just as much of a wild card. And who knows, maybe this could end up backfiring on Dana spectacularly if things don't go to plan. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about Conor claiming that he wants to fight but seemingly won't be given one. Do you think that he's being intentionally iced like I do, or do you think that he actually doesn't want to fight at all? Also, let me know your thoughts on the UFC's next TV deal, because Conor McGregor or not, this deal has to happen. As always, if you liked the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.